Live? Yes, and we are live. Thank you so much for joining us at this episode of Construction Carbon Talk, which is which we're going to be talking about the impact of carbon data on construction decarbonization. This is a periodic program that we hold once in 2 months, and we hope that you're going to get value from this edition of the episode as well as subsequent ones. And with me today discussing the impact of carbon data on construction decarbonization is Kiran and Anand. So, Kiran, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure, thank you very much, Shuhaib. Yes, my name is Kieran Humphreys. I am carbon manager for Balfour Beatty Group, who are a construction company that are based in the UK, working across major infrastructure, highways, construction. My role is in the field of ESG and group reporting for the Balfour Beatty Construction Group. That often covers lots of things to do with carbon data.
Awesome. Anand, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for inviting me today. And so I'm a PhD candidate. I will be doctorate like soon, inshallah. And then I'm in sustainability in construction industry, and that's it for now.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. And really nice. So we'll go straight into the discussion, and people would continue to join us as we move on. And this is going to be on YouTube forever. Okay. Start with if I ask you, Kiran, can you kindly tell us what construction carbon footprint is all about? What does it encompass?
So, that's a good question. The construction carbon footprint encompasses pretty much everything from the material production through to the construction process, transportation of materials and people, energy use on site, and energy use in the course of construction is a huge piece of that. Waste management as well, I suppose, is a facet of it because of any waste or materials that are used in the course of construction that might not be fully used efficiently, so that therefore generates waste. Emissions from, obviously the big one is construction equipment. We still powered by diesel in this industry, and that is the biggest facet of our carbon footprint. But also land use change as well, which is becoming more of a facet of the conversation around the carbon emissions of construction. Is are we developing on does our development include deforestation or land use change from one agricultural or natural environment to a built environment? So I think from carbon construction, the carbon construction footprint, it's from that very, very early beginning to thinking about where we build, and then through to how we build it, and ultimately the life cycle of that particular asset.
Fantastic. Anand, I know you've worked in the industry for quite a while. I think almost
like 18 years. Yeah.
So tell us, in terms of research, what you see in research and what you see on the field when we look at construction carbon footprint. Do you think the same things that the academic industry is looking at when it comes to construction carbon footprint is the same thing that is being looked at within the industry?
Honestly, it's not the same. It's not the same at all. Like if we're talking research and we're talking industry, there are a little bit like some difference between it, or let's say a gap. So in terms of research, we're like just ahead compared to what we have in industry. There are a lot of efforts that are done to be able to reduce the carbon footprint of the construction or the building in general, mainly in operational phase. But still, in terms of industry, where we are on the work site, except the waste management and the fact that we are more focused on economic sustainability and not really focused on environmental sustainability unless the client is requiring that explicitly in the contract. Otherwise, in there are some companies that are aware of the importance of this environmental sustainability, and they are trying to apply those practices by themselves, but that costs a bit more than their competitor. And if they are not already having a good share of the market, it's not that easy to be able to be competitive compared with their rivals.
Thank you.
So there's some gap. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I could totally relate to what you said, Anan, and what Kiran said, because you know, I've had the opportunity to work in the industry. You know, working with Kiran about for BT, and then doing my research, I discovered that the sort of things we focus on when we look at construction carbon footprint. We are at high level trying to look at how can we decarbonize. What are the ways that we can capture the data from site, okay, crunch those data, and then profile solution. Whereas in the industry, the industry is much more focused on what are the, say, 1, 2, 3 things we need to do right now, to achieve decarbonization. Giving it to the industry as well, there is this effort, to look at best way to ensure that the data are being captured. But in the industry, things move really fast, and the industry wants a faster solution, whereas in academia, we tend to move slowly because we have to ensure that we get it sort of right the first time. So this sort of gap exists, but I think that there needs to be some sort of synergy between the industry and academia to achieve both, when we're talking about capturing this data, as well as decarbonizing, using the data to decarbonize our construction processes, which I think we're going to get to much further into this discussion. Let's look at another thing regarding accurate carbon data, both collecting the data as well as understanding of this data. And I think this is something Kiran is kind of like a whiz at. I call him Kiran, can you tell us what is the significance of having accurate carbon data in terms of decarbonizing the construction, both the construction process and what we build? Because I understand that you do a lot of things around capturing those data and crunching those data and using those data to advise other colleagues.
Okay, well, I think firstly the whole point of data is that it should inform decision making. It should underpin decisions that are grounded in the real world. So for me, there's with carbon data, there is so much of a steep learning curve that the industry has had to take in order to meet answering those questions. Like, fundamentally, where should we focus our efforts to decarbonize? What decisions do we need to take? What expenditure needs to happen in order for those the greenhouse gas reductions to take place? Second to that, I think that accurate data is needed to robustly demonstrate performance against set targets and goals that the industry is very, very keen to set. Most construction companies have some sort of decarbonisation target, whether that's a net zero goal, whether that's a near-term target, especially in geographies where it's mandated. Less so in geographies where the legal requirements are looser. Again, going back to the comment that was raised earlier around how the industry being reactive to the situation of a low profit margin and being driven by clients and also being driven by legislation. So yeah, ultimately the data really is the story to inform the action. Of which obviously there's lots of complexities around how to get to grips with it, and where we're sat at present, there's no real silver bullet solution that says, okay, this is the software that you need to use, or this is the guidance that you need to refer to. Much of the guidance out there is not written for the construction industry for the start. It's very much written with manufacturing in mind. So construction, where everything is transient, where you win a project, build it, then hand it over, and it's in its nature, it's transient. And quite a lot of the guidance around data collection is written for manufacturing, where you have a very solid permanent base, and maybe would change due to market considerations or the different geographies you might operate in, or the strength of particular markets or consumer trends. But still, you've got a very fundamental similar basis. I think hopefully that answers your question. I think with data, it's difficult, it's complex. There's a lot of this information that you need to funnel into, but quite a lot of this information already exists within business. It's already exists in financial systems, in experts' understanding that are located throughout, at all scales of a construction business. But it's just linking it into what that means in terms of climate and what that means in terms of carbon.
Interesting. And before starting this webinar, I was just on the Causeway Technologies webinar. We were talking about data capture, which is something that the construction industry in the UK, Balfour Beatty, Care, Morgan Sindall, and the likes, and aggregate industry as a supplier coming together to see how those data can be captured accurately and at source, to ensure that there is no disconnect or there is no disinformation when it comes to the data collection. So I think the industry is moving in the right direction. And I want to ask you from your perspective, and I know that when we met the first time in the tram in Dubai on our way to COP28, you mentioned something around lack of data. How when you started your PhD, you couldn't find much of the carbon data needed to go about your research. What can you tell us about how far that has changed, probably since you started your PhD up to now, and if you think things have improved in terms of carbon data capturing, and how that has transformed or translates into meaningful work that you do in your research?
Actually, in terms of data, it depends on the location you are focused on. So if we're talking about, like, let's say developed countries or emerging countries, or let's say countries that are very committed to environmental change or climate change goals, they are trying to collect this data and just archive it and put it and make it available for the users, either like in the industry or academia or research or whatever. But for countries where they're like less focused and where they are still struggling with economic stuff and with sociocultural challenges, it's not that easy for them to collect that data and archive it and put it in and make it available. So if like I was focused on some countries in Africa, or let's say African countries, so even the data, it could be available, but it's not available at it's not published or it's not accessible. So it's not that easy to use it. So we still use the databases that are published in UK, for instance, or US or China or wherever. So this is a very challenging aspect in terms of carbon data and how we can make change and how we can decarbonize whatever. Like, we're not talking about the construction industry, but about all the kind of industries. If we want to decarbonize those industries, we have to have like local databases, because if we're talking materials are so different from a country to another, and the way we manufacture those materials, it's not the same at all. You will find some manufacturer using gas, others are using electricity, or so the carbon footprint, it's very different from an area to another. So we can't all the time rely to databases that are developed in other countries to develop something that's in another location. So for me, it's still a very let's say a barrier or high challenge in that kind of countries. So and I think if like this, if the country or the government make an effort to mandate some like that kind of data collection, I think that will help a lot.
Thank you so much. I like the fact that you took us to different different locations, and how different they have different challenges of their data, and I think I'm going to stick with you for a moment, Anan, and this is to look at in terms of training. So there's a challenge of data collection. Like you said, data is probably there, but it's not being collated well. Kiran also mentioned the fact that data is there, but aggregating those data together and using it to make informed decision is the challenge. Now, Anan, what would you say in terms of training? Could this be linked to training in terms of the people handling those data, or the people that data is domiciled with, are not sufficiently trained in terms of whether it's communicating the data correctly, or taking notes of the data even from the onset? Could this be a challenge in terms? Could training be a challenge?
It's a challenge and it's not, so it's so it depends. If we're talking academia or research in general, you will find that it's not a big challenge, because this is the purpose of the research in itself. But if we're talking construction industry, the main focus of any practitioner or any person who is doing industry, it's when should I finish this project to go to another project. So they're focusing on the how, not like what, or like the data itself. So in my opinion, whatever like the potential of decarbonization or data collection is not during the construction, like the project development, the construction itself. It's way before. It should be like upstream work, and this work, it's not done by the contractors themselves, like by the industrial like by the industry itself. It could be done, as Karen said before, by the manufacturer, people who are developing or are creating those materials, who are focusing on transportation, who are doing like the upstream work, not on the construction sites themselves. So data collection should be focused on that side first, and then like we prepare the path for the construction industry first. So which is not let's say the priority now of most of that kind of countries. But if we're talking, we're going out of low income and like middle income or low income countries, and we go to upper middle income and high income countries, you will find data already prepared, and you will find research, it's well funded to have that of kind of data. And even the missing data, like you will find a lot of research and a lot of funds that are invested in that area to fill that kind of shortage of data.
Awesome. So, Kiran, let me come to you. Anana has looked at it from perspective of upstream, before construction process. Let me come to you in terms of during construction process, construction delivery. Do you think that, from your perspective, do you think there's the people that are handling the data, or that are supposed to take care or capture the data during construction process, do you think they are sufficiently trained, on how to go about those data? Because from your previous argument, you mentioned that most of the guidelines out there are written for manufacturing and not typically for construction. So would you think that, training is still a challenge? And if you can kindly marry that with cost, do you think cost issue, associated with, collecting and maybe utilizing carbon data?
Well, yeah, I think you've basically, by bringing cost into the equation, you've answered the question yourself. I think with with anything with such a tight margin industry, there's always going to be the discussion of cost and how long things take and how much resource can be given over to something that might not yield, be perceived as yielding a return in the short term. I think across the industry, the construction industry is short-termist. It is all about, what is your next project, what's next, and there is a lack of corporate memory, I believe, amongst my peers and within the construction industry about what's retained in terms of, a project is delivered and then finished, and then some of the learnings, where that be around carbon or anything else, might be lost. I think cost is the huge barrier in terms of allowing people to understand really why we're doing this. I think maybe the conversation around data collection for carbon is always around, just we need to get the number down on the page. We need to understand it, but then that's not linked up to the strategy and the strategic vision of decarbonisation. I think, Hanan, before we continue, I think, Hanan, you made a really, really salient point around the disparity between how certain economies that are the higher income economies or have environment is more within the core of their legislative vision, there is a disconnect between that and the ability for the emerging world, to the emerging economies in the world, and the lower and the middle income to meet those. And I think that's really important, because obviously the climate crisis is a global issue,
Exactly.
and if certain economies are doing this, whereas others are lagging, and the ones that are lagging are usually those that experience the worst effects of the climate crisis. I think that's very interesting. And is it the responsibility of the more developed economies to support that carbon agenda within the rest of the world?
Yeah, so much,
I,
Kira.
I totally agree. I totally agree, because you will find that kind of countries. I'm talking about low income countries. They're struggling with the basics. So, and even like the construction infrastructure and the construction in general, it's not that developed. Even though you will find. Like, let's take Africa as an example. Africa has huge resources, and you will find investors are going there and having, like, whatever you build there, it's a benefit. It's like, it's money. It's money. Whatever, you will get money out of it, because the resources are so low cost. Whatever, it's still very like, it's affordable. Okay, so if we are talking about like direct funds investment, and they're coming from developed countries, and if those investors, when they come to Africa or wherever they go, they are imposing, or they are bringing with them that kind of knowledge, and they are making it like mandatory. I think, but by themselves, they will find themselves with the carbon data, with the carbon practices, with new mentality in terms of environmental sustainability. So I think it's a sort of indirect lead for them, and they will get in profit out of it as well. It's not in terms of, yes, we're going to help. It's not only to help, but they're getting profit out of it as well. So I think if we think, because if we're talking industry, we're talking profitability. That's obvious. This is the first thing we think about. So if we want to have this balance, it's a win-win. If we bring when we are there to invest, we bring with us not only this agenda of getting benefit, but also bring in the good practices, the environmental like goals, or all that, all
Mm.
like the whole package. I think it could be a good solution to be able to help and get benefit out of it as well.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much, Anand and Kiran. Um, Now we've spoken about the challenges of carbon data. We've spoken about how having accurate carbon data can assist influence decision making and all of that. Let's move how or the practicalities of this influence, how we can really utilize the carbon data. So let's start from its utilization with our supply chain, right? So, Akira, and again, I'll come to you first. In terms of with all the work you're doing, if you can kindly assist to make it a bit practical, it will be really useful. All the work you're doing with, getting those carbon data, collecting it. How do you think it is assisting, supply chain to become to decarbonize, their own carbon footprint?
Yeah, I think, well, you can't influence what you don't know. And I think the first thing about this is when organizations start to find those hotspots of carbon, find what the sustainable design choices might be, whether that's utilizing lower carbon options of the same material, or innovative materials, or just doing things in a different way. I think this is definitely the contractors have to bring the smaller organizations like the subcontractors that work with us, and also the supply chain along with that journey as well. And I think really you can only make those informed choices about what to buy and how to do things if you've got a robust data set. And I think when you start compiling the data around, specifically talking about the scope 3 category 1 purchase goods and services here, once you start to get a greater nuanced understanding of that, then you can then look at the alternatives and look at your suppliers and say, how can we work together to innovate and to develop solutions that will ultimately decarbonize everybody. Very much we are reliant on how fast the supply chain can possibly decarbonize.
Awesome. Anand, do you have anything to add to this?
For me, like for the supply chain, it's very interesting, and you know that international transportation, it's almost like 2.5% of the global carbon emissions. So if we can optimize the supply chain, it will be awesome, and we will be like reducing helping the decarbonization in like in very good way.
Awesome. So, Anand, sticking to you for a moment, in terms of using carbon data, to influence policies, right? And why I'm coming to you is because you've really spoken about how the contrast between developing countries and developed countries. Do you think that if we understand, the full extent of the carbon that is being emitted during construction or prior to construction, as the case may be, do you think that this can shape the regulatory framework of countries? And why I'm asking this question is because I think it was in 2019 that the World Green Building Council estimated that almost 40% of the world carbon is associated with construction industry, and I think that was when the buzz and then the attention and the focus started to come to the construction industry to say, hey, we need to decarbonize the construction industry if we must achieve net zero by 2050, right? So do you think that if we have accurate data, this could further impact the regulatory environment of countries to decarbonize, their not only, let's extend it a bit beyond, construction now to achieve their own decarbonization goal as a country?
I totally agree with that idea. In fact, when we have like data numbers, we know what we are talking about. So if you are like whatever, not only carbon emissions, whatever, if you want to convince someone, you have to show him the impact of this thing that you
Yeah.
are talking about. So if we have like accurate data, carbon data, that will help a lot decision makers to know what to focus on first, and
Mm.
to do like the agenda according to the priorities and according to what it's most impactful first, to try to reduce it. So coming back to the construction industry or the building industry in general, uh, it has been shown that the let's see, the operational stage is almost like 90% of this whole 40% global 40% of carbon emission globally. So you will find most of the countries or most of the policies or strategies are focusing on how we can reduce the operational stage in building industry in general. And the
Mm.
focus in general, it's about the like the energy consumption, because it's mostly due to like the carbon emission, it mostly due to electric energy consumption in general. So they are focusing on let's say HVAC in general, what, but it's still not very efficient in whole countries. So you will find, for instance, some countries when they are doing statistics and they are collecting data and having statistics, they know whether they are going in the good direction or not, which is very useful. For instance, I have recent research in UK, and they are saying this research highlights that the fact that they are focusing on the operational stage, at some point they will like the construction stage, and they will the operational stage will switch, like the rate of impact in the whole building life cycle carbon emission, it will switch. And the construction stage, at some point it will be almost like 50 to 70% of the whole building life cycle carbon
Mm.
emissions, which is good. Like it helps the decision makers to know whether they're going in the good direction or not, and like they're like the policies that they already considered at the first place, they were working good or not. So for me, data collection in general, it's the basics to build the strategies, to track the strategies, and also to evaluate the impact of those strategies, and
Mm.
also at some point to switch or to adapt the strategy according to what we have. So data collection, it's the basis for any decision making for like toward decarbonization in construction industry.
Thank you, Anand. Before we go on, if you're watching us, or if you're joining to, if you're watching this later, kindly hit the subscribe button. Kindly follow us on our YouTube channel, on our Twitter account, so that you can be notified on when we are going to have our next talk. So, Kiran, let me come to you. It's interesting, the conversation so far, and from what Anand said, you mentioned something around how when you continue to focus on operational carbon emission, put strategies in place in terms of from policymakers to decarbonize that. In fact, I read that I think in the UK about in 2011 thereabout, I can't remember the year correctly, policy was focused on reducing operational carbon emission, and that has really worked so far. However, when it comes to the embodied carbon emission, there is no much policy on that at the moment, right? And from what you said, Anand, that focus will then make embodied carbon to shoot up. I actually read, a research about how if you focus on, for instance, the thermal envelope of the building, okay, just to ensure that they minimize the building is more energy efficient, and you could actually push up the embodied carbon by almost 13%. Okay, so it's huge if we continue to focus on just operational carbon, reducing that. Now, Kiran, what I want to ask you at this stage is, being in the industry for quite a long time, and you've been working on, I know you started as an energy efficient analyst, before you then moved to being the carbon manager for Balfour Beatty, global Balfour Beatty business. What would you say as regards the kind of policies that the government need to start putting in place, since they are becoming aware of this data that is coming out of both research and the industry? Okay, what do you think the policymakers in the UK, for instance, need to start putting in place to ensure that we reduce carbon during construction based on the data that is being shown to them?
Okay, yeah, I think, well, firstly, I think you're talking about the sort of the history of the increased amount of attention that's spent on what disclosures need to look like. So yes, I do agree that the having to disclose scope 1 and 2 operational emissions has had an impact, because it, just by the very nature of having to count and to understand that, allows you to then look at the efficiencies around that. And when we started off with what was called the carbon reduction commitment in the UK, that was very much the firm basis of everyone needed to start collecting data. But as an output of that, it put a lot of emphasis on businesses having to install smart meters into their commercial properties. So that then created a market for smart meters in the UK. And now most domestic properties in the UK have got smart meters. So there's sort of knock-on effects from the policy. Now with both the simplified energy and carbon reporting requirements and ESOS, energy savings opportunities, there's more of an emphasis on how those two schemes allow this carbon data to allow businesses to pursue efficiency. I think any decision around that's above and beyond voluntary disclosure about scope 3 and embodied carbon, I mean, we're moving into a phase now where the Science-Based Target Initiative is a internationally known and understood standard or badge that companies can show that they have really considered what action they need to take on the data they collect. But that's still voluntary, and I think that at the moment, especially speaking from a UK perspective, there's so much commercial pressure on the costs of materials, inflation, labour issues, the future of the industry, what that's going to look like, for the government to really think, right, okay, we need to sort of put, I mean, again, across all industries really, more demands on reporting that are mandated by policy, as opposed to all these things cost money, and the concern is that more and more legislation around reporting will just add on cost to businesses' bottom line. Around reporting, though, there is a drive towards voluntary reporting, and things like science-based targets. Most construction companies now have some sort of near-term or net zero target. I think from a UK perspective as well, it's very interesting to comment on the fact that our government does not have its own net zero trajectory strategy. There is no abatement roadmap out there. The onus is very much on businesses to decide what this is going to look like for a business that needs to plan out to 2030, 2040, 2050. But yet the government at present is not putting any policy in place to show how they're going to decarbonize the grid even further than they are. What that's going to look like in terms of transition to EV, any cohesive policy around EV charging rollout in our streetscape and things like this. So I think in a way, maybe the construction industry is slightly ahead of government in the UK in terms of the level of voluntary disclosure and what we know about our business, and also our willingness to engage and to drive down emissions, not just because our clients are asking for it, but because it makes our businesses more robust and more profitable. So I think it's an interesting question, but also absolutely, data does underpin everything that we need to do, and it also just, the whole point is that it drives action.
Awesome. And the part that you mentioned about the UK government not having its own sort of strategy in place, and that the construction is more ahead of the government when it comes.
I think so. I mean, because we, as the construction industry, because we've been forced to have to look at this. It sort of allows us to have more of a cohesive long-term plan. I think it's worth saying as well for the US as well. I mean, there are some movements in the United States around carbon accounting, around green investment, but because of the volatility of that geography is in terms of the political will to implement these, it's all on a very federal basis. So it is based on regional governments, and there's no sort of overall cohesive federal approach to this yet. So in many ways, construction businesses in the US that are doing things in step with their counterparts in Europe, in the UK, elsewhere, that have stronger and more robust policy, then that's actually way above and beyond what the government are asking.
And I think that's why, in the UK, this is just to buttress your point in terms of the construction industry being ahead of the government, because the industry, being the industry with some professional associations like ICE, I/E, RIGS, RIBA, and all of that, I think they came together, and then they recently, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, released a policy paper calling on the government to actually put plans in place, to put a policy in place that would set targets, in reducing embodied carbon, which is, I think, is the Part Z document led by Simon Sturgis. So I fully agree with you when you say that the construction industry is fully ahead of the government, and is the industry that is even calling government to account to say you need to put legislation in place to reduce embodied carbon. So I mean, it's interesting, and I will see how things play out, as we move ahead. So quickly, I want to look at in terms of softwares that we currently utilize in capturing carbon data, because all of these things that we've been talking about as well, sometimes it could be.
Excuse me, Suhaib.
Okay.
Before moving to software, I want to just add something about this, like the point we were discussing. It's the fact that I think after some point, like when we start implementing environment eco-friendly practices, at some point we start to be used to it, and we can't go back. So when we start to be used to it, by default, the contractors will find themselves trying to do like better strategies and better way to enhance their, because it will start to be part of their agenda, part of their policy. So it's embedded, it will be embedded, or it will be something implicit in their strategy. So but I think the government should just start doing that and mandate that at the first 10 years, for instance, and then after that, the markets will find themselves used to it, and like adopting those practices, without thinking about it, even like it will start to be something that we use day to day. So it's what I want to add. It's perhaps the first step, it's about the government, but after that it starts to be just a habit.
Awesome.
And the industry will continue to do it. Yes.
Thank you so much. And I think that's why the industry is also calling for that. I mean, in the UK,
Exactly.
for instance, that I'm aware of, because it is a case of, if the government leads, okay, while some people within the industry are already taking actions, more people will take action if the government lead with their policy and then puts their money where their mouth is, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of software, and why I want to go to software is how this assists the whole conversation. Because again, it could be that the government, I mean, I'm looking for an excuse for the government now. They could say that, they are not comfortable with the sort of data that is being presented to them. So if they are not comfortable with that data, and they probably don't have belief in that data, it will be difficult for them to utilize those data that is being presented to them to make decisions, right? And then this brings us to softwares in terms of how this can, be utilized to capture data. And we all know that, the world is growing so fast. AI is coming into play now. There's that's another whole conversation on its own. But we won't go into deep into AI now. Let's look at basic carbon accounting software. How developed do you think this software are, and do you think that the software that are available now, in terms of accuracy, do you think they are accurate enough? And in terms of if we can add a bit of ethics into that, and maybe privacy, do you think all of this has been factored into this software by those that are producing or manufacturing this software? Anyone wants to take that, Kiran or Anand?
Yeah, sure. I believe that software helps, help a lot to enhance those policies implementation, and the fact that we're human, we have errors, we forget, we can't archive everything, we can do like a lot of stuff at the same time. So software are there to help to let's say overcome that kind of challenges. And in terms of availability, there are a lot of software that are already in the market and they are doing a good job until now. But, the accuracy, we can't talk about the accuracy because like 100%, there are all the time a certain margin of errors that can be due to the fact that we're not talking about the same location, we are not talking about the same manufacturer. Like concrete, for instance, the carbon footprint of concrete of a manufacturer, it's never the same as another one. So there's that kind of, let's say, inherent errors or something that it's obvious, but we have to take that into consideration as well. But and you're talking about like artificial intelligence, which is it start to be the trend right now. It helps a lot because if we are talking about that, it could analyze the data themselves and highlight what it can be considered, what it should not be considered, and help the human being to achieve like the target that they are working for at like less time and with more efficiency and with be more productive in this turn, and focus on the let's say the more like the most important things instead of doing those repetitive tasks or this like the routine. So and there is this machine learning as well, so which can help as well to improve the data we collect, and we improve how we collect it as well, which is like if we're like going from operational data that it could be collected through sensors or through IoT in general, we are moving toward embedded carbon, that it's more complex, it depends on and we're talking about construction industry, the main feature of construction projects, it's one of kind. So every project is specific. We can't repeat the same project twice. Impossible, because it depends on where we are building that, who are involved in that, how much time, what kind of materials we are bringing those materials from. So it's a lot of parameters that have to be considered in the same project. So that one of kind feature of the project make it difficult to have like sensors, and that's enough. So we have to use more advanced technologies to be able to track the carbon footprint, and also to do like the accurate evaluation of it, and to help archive it as well and be able to reuse it afterward.
Awesome. Kiran, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really fascinating start to this discussion, Hanan. I think that all the things that you've mentioned, it's sort of my takeaway from that is like it's complex. It's not straightforward. many of the projects are bespoke, one of a kind. I think so. Accounting software, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have to automate as much as possible, and whether that's using machine learning or AI to assist us with that, or to draw conclusions or valuable conclusions from that, I think that's only a benefit to the construction industry. I think what's happened is that because of these requirements around, life cycle carbon or ESG reporting, there is a lot of available options out there on the market, many of whom don't really understand what the thrust of the data is, and that's getting it right. I mean, there's a lot of software companies that market themselves on very powerful dashboarding tools, a software that looks great, but obviously we know that the underpinning data underneath it needs to be accurate as well. And I suppose that's where, Hanan, you talk about sensors. I think that's very much the future. People want more live data. People want more accurate data that's real time. And that's something that allows more proof to say, well, this is an inefficient practice, or this materials manufacture process isn't as robust as the manufacturer is claiming, for example. So I think it's the IT infrastructure that sits outside the software as the complex bit. It's the sensors. It's the actual accuracy of the data that feeds into it, is something that's is the area of focus. I think. Yeah, like I said, I think that there's a whole lot of choice out there. I don't think that there's one piece of software that does everything yet.
Yeah.
But I think there is a whole cottage industry around trying to find that solution.
I saw a company last year when I went to the is it the London Offsite Conference or something in London?
Offsite design for manufacturer offsite. Yeah.
And this is not an advert. It's not paid. Company is called Build Dots. Okay, and what they do, they have these sensors. Just to pick on that sensor that you mentioned, Anna and Kieran. They have this wearable technology that you can wear, and then you can move around the site. Even while working, the workers on site could actually wear it, but probably because of expense and all of that, you can't have multiple of that. But you can use that on site, and then you go around, and it has like a video. As you go around, it captures everything, and then there's a back end to that video that is linking to whatever technology they've put in place, and they are capturing if all the works are being done right or not. Basically, they are trying to reduce the issue of rework at the end of the day. And touching about that, I told them, I said, what you are doing is so fantastic that it could actually help to reduce embodied carbon emission related to construction processes. Do you guys know this? And they said, oh yeah, it's part of things we consider, but it's not the core. They are not marketing their technology as something that can assist to reduce carbon. And I told them, you need to put this in your marketing tagline, because if for people that are looking at reducing carbon, and especially contractors who are working with low margin, they want to minimize the issue of rework as much as possible, because that is also part of what eats the profit of contractors. And if you can actually give them this technology, market it as something like that, you would get more clients. I just thought to put an example to that sensor thing in terms of assisting to capture data in real time and utilizing that data in the back end to make decisions as it relates to carbon emission. And I know that we have just about 5 minutes left. Time really.
I want just to add something. It's not only about software, but there are also about methods as well that we can use. Like, for instance, we can use, I don't know, lean management to reduce rework. We can use, and those like software can, we need some money to do that. But methods that we need no money. It's zero. Zero depends. Just go ahead and we can implement that, and we reduce and using recycled materials as well, using prefabrication. Those are just methods that we can use, and we reduce the embedded carbon not only 10% or 20%, it could be even 90% of reduction by using only that kind of methods as well, and it costs nothing.
Awesome. Awesome. So quickly, before we round up, I would like for both of you to kindly talk about, what are the future trends and opportunities that you think that, having an accurate carbon data can assist or allow us, to further decarbonize the construction projects that we deliver. What are the future trends and opportunities that you see?
I think. Go ahead, Kieran.
No, I was just thinking it's a really good question.
Yeah,
No, you go, please.
It's complex and tricky. Okay, but for the opportunity, I think the future trend, it should be it's to join industry to research and make them go align. So there are a lot of like innovative and creative, let's say amazing ideas that cost nothing and will reverse the trend of carbon emissions, but they are still archived somewhere. Even there are some scientific publication about them. So for me, the future, it could be perhaps it's to urge the construction industry or the contractors or companies to go and consult with researcher to implement what it's already exists in the research, and it can helps a lot to reduce the carbon emissions.
Awesome. Kieran?
Yeah, I think that the sort of the near-term future is definitely around enhanced reporting. So construction companies putting out more information into the public domain about what they're doing and what their successes are. And I think that to go back to the example that you gave, Shuhaib, around the sensors and wearable tech, I think ultimately what that points to is that there are solutions that exist, but no one's thought this is a carbon solution or this is a solution in which we can eventually decarbonize. I think it's joining those dots. I think there's going to be a lot more of a holistic view on all the facets of the construction operation in terms of how that features into decarbonisation. And I think that we can already sort of see the beginnings of that in the UK with things like PAS 2080 becoming a lot more embedded within construction organisations and then being able to deliver it effectively in terms of lifecycle carbon analysis and management. I think that the future of data will be, more reporting, more requirements, which will then in turn drive innovation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kieran. Thank you, and I really appreciate it. For people that join us, thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, Shuhaib.
Thank you. And we will be having our next episode in April 2024. Kindly stay tuned. You're going to get information about that on our LinkedIn platform and on our Twitter account. Thank you.